one of the things I like to be able to do with my work is to shine a light on the kind of irrationality of the skeptical mindset and to really give people permission to feel safe to talk about it, to feel like your experiences are valid, legitimate. Other people are having the same things happen to them. And you can talk about them, and there's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing weird about it. And I think so many people, also from the series on Netflix, that was what they took away from it. That, okay, my experiences are not weird. I can talk about them now. And then they'll write me an email and say, I never talked to anybody about this before, but you're the first person. And they just feel finally they can get it off their chest, you know? I feel like if I can give that to even one person, it means a whole lot, to just be able to give that gift to people. And it also expands consciousness for me, and I think the other people that come up against this. It just expands your perceptions of who you are and what the universe is all about. And I think curiosity is a really something that I'm inflicted by, you know? It's a wonderful thing to feel curious and also to feel a sense of awe about our world and about the meaning of everything and that what lies beyond our physical world.
Welcome to another installment of Behind Greatness by Inspire. It's Luciano here speaking as your host. Thank you for listening in. Want to remind you, listener, please rate us if you haven't had the chance already, and also share with your family and friends. This is how we grow. This is how we want to grow. And that's not true. That's not the full truth. We also want to grow through donations of listeners who wish to give. As regular listeners know that we are a registered charity, and you can go and donate online at behindgreatness.org. You'll see immediately where, and some listeners will be able to receive a tax receipt as well, seeing as that we're a charity. So let's get right into our next guest. Her name is Leslie Kean. She is an independent investigative journalist and author of the 2010 New York Times bestseller, UFOs, Generals, Pilots, and Government Officials Go on the Record. Her 2 decades of mainstream reporting on UFOs culminated in her co-authoring a series of groundbreaking stories for the New York Times, beginning in 2017, which included the release of 3 Navy videos. Her work was profiled in The New Yorker in May 2021, and Leslie is also the author of the award-winning Surviving Death, A Journalist Investigates Evidence for an Afterlife. She was a consulting producer for the 2021 6-part documentary series Surviving Death, a Netflix original based on her book, which was produced by Breakthrough Films. She is currently working on a 5-part documentary series on UFOs for CNN, also with Breakthrough Films, to be broadcast within the next few months, which at this point is July-ish, 2022.
Hopefully, yes.
Okay. Leslie has been interviewed on CNN, MSNBC, Fox, NBC, CBS, The Colbert Report, Science Fantastic with Michio Kaku, and NPR. Her work has been covered by USA Today, Vanity Fair, US News and World Report, Scientific American, and The Guardian, among many other broadcast and print media. For more info, the listener can visit the rest of her work at lesliekean.com, and the spelling of that is also in the show notes. Welcome to the show, Leslie.
Thanks, Luciano. So happy to be with you today. It's great.
Well, let's get right into it. Theoretical physicist Michio Kaku praised your book as the gold standard for UFO research. Why?
Oh my God, you're asking me that?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think when the book came out, it was kind of a pivotal book because it brought together such high-level sources, you know, really, really high-level credible sources from around the world that had studied UFOs or that had encounters with UFOs. And these people contributed to the book by writing their own chapters. So, and it was also a book of journalism. So the book had a lot of credibility and real solidity to it. And there hadn't been a book like that before. So it kind of rocked the world, you know. It's not like the data hadn't been out, but it hadn't been pulled together in one place. And so I, for instance, I had 4 generals in this book who wrote their own chapters. And there was a former governor in the United States that wrote a chapter, and I had an Iranian pilot who tried to shoot down a UFO. He was a general also. So rather than like me interview him and then tell the reader what he said, I actually invited them to write their own chapters. And it's just like you read this book, you read what these people are saying, and you're not gonna doubt what the general in Chile says, for instance, who heads up an agency that's been studying this thing for decades. And he writes what they found in their agency. And it's just this combination of such solid information that's why I think he said that. There really hadn't been anything like this before. And so, yeah, he also went on, I remember he went on MSNBC to kind of review the book. And he said, this book is the closest thing we have to a smoking gun. And he said, we don't have a smoking gun. We need an alien chip. He says this all the time. I don't know if you've ever watched him. We need an alien chip. When we have an alien chip, we've nailed it. You know, this doesn't do that, but this is the closest thing we have to a smoking gun. This book is the closest thing we have to a smoking gun. So I was pretty pleased when he said that.
And I bet, because this was a culmination of a lot of your efforts, part of which were which culminated previously to a press conference in 2007. You want to bring us through that?
Yeah, I mean, that was 3 years before the book came out. That's kind of what inspired me to do the book. And that press conference was in 2007, and I had been involved with this for 7 years at that point. And prior to that, I've been focused on writing mainstream stories about UFOs, you know, that were really serious and fact-based and used authoritative sources, and, you know, wrote about a report that was written by a NASA scientist about aviation safety issues, for instance. It was the kind of thing that you couldn't ridicule. And so I just kept doing these articles, and I was doing other stuff too. But the press conference that you mentioned was, I co-organized this with a filmmaker named James Fox, who's some people in your audience may have heard of. He has a movie out called The Phenomenon, which is really, really good. And we had invited people from all over the world to come and be a part of this panel at the National Press Club in Washington. And they told their stories, their accounts of what their research they had done or the encounters that they'd had. Some of them were pilots, some of them were witnesses, military people who had witnessed close up certain events and things like that. And it was just really powerful. It was covered all over the world. The former governor of Arizona, Fife Symington, was the moderator for the conference. And we were calling for a government agency to be set up. But what that really did was, that's where I met a number of the people who ended up writing chapters for my book. And that's where I thought, you know, these people have so much to say. And each one of them at the press conference, they had 5 minutes to give their presentations. And I thought, that's not nearly enough time to really get the message out. You know, this needs to go into a book. It needs to have more detail than you could ever have in a press conference. And a press conference also comes and goes, right? It's just, It's on the news for a day and then it's over.
It's fleeting.
Whereas a book is something tangible that sticks around. So that's where I got the idea. And then I spent the next few years working on the book. And then it came out in 2010, 3 years later.
What's your purpose?
You mean with this, or
no? What's Leslie's purpose?
Well, I mean, what I'm most interested in is, you know, trying to understand and also communicate to the world about issues that I feel are like some of the biggest questions that face humanity, the biggest mysteries that face humanity. I'm really interested in those, and the two that I've been focused on are, you know, the questions: Are we alone? Are there any other non-human intelligent life forms or manifestations of non-human intelligence out there, which there certainly is through the UFO phenomenon. And the second question is, what happens after we die? Do we survive death? That's really more the question rather than what happens, because we can't really know much about that. But so it's all about the nature of consciousness. That's what my other interest is. And so I've always been interested in sort of probing the deeper realities. You know, isn't there much more to life than just our physical world, our physical senses? And there's an inner component of that, of course, which is a more kind of personal spiritual journey. But I feel like I've been so fortunate to be able to have actual work that encapsulate that as well. And most journalists don't focus on these kinds of topics. So to be able to bring my journalism to those topics and to stick with them for long periods of time, I feel very fortunate to have been able to do that.
So in my experience as a reader and a consumer of some of this material over the years, not a lot, and not frequent, not consistent. It was very rare for me to see one person last so long in a career to communicate the information that you've been communicating, let alone a woman. And not to make this a man-woman thing, but it's very odd. Like you must be an oddball in those circles. Just by virtue of your gender. And I don't mean to. I want to ask it, but I don't mean anything by it. I just because I'm curious why. Why is it that we don't see more women at the forefront of investigating those two questions? Are we alone, and do we survive death?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are more in the second question. Like we were just talking earlier. I mean, I think there's a lot of women that are investigating consciousness in various different ways.
Yes. Yeah.
Because it's really more than just the question about surviving death. It's really what is the nature of consciousness. That's all connected. So, but the UFO field, I don't know, there really aren't many journalists, male or female. There's a lot of people that call themselves researchers, but there aren't. I mean, George Knapp is a well-known journalist. He's in Las Vegas, so he's more. He works more in a local arena. I mean, he has a television show there. There aren't really many journalists that work in national mainstream media year after year after year. And I think it's partly because I'm independent. I've been fortunate enough to have income, a source of income that allowed me to be independent. So if you're working for something like the Washington Post, or you're working for National Public Radio or something, they're going to assign you all kinds of different topics. You don't have the choice to just stay with one thing, right? That's just what you do, because you're working for a company, you're working for an editor, you're working for somebody else. Whereas I'm this free agent, so I was able to choose, this is all I want to do, therefore this is what I'm going to do. And it's just, I think it's partly that. I mean, there may be people like me out there who would love to not necessarily focus on this, but would like to focus on one thing like that, and they just don't have that opportunity because of their job situation. But most of the people in the UFO field are male, people that have been researching it. But I think there's more and more women in there now. But I'm not that connected with sort of the research, the Twitter sphere, the research world of all the UFO people, because I'm just doing the journalistic thing.
I can see it changing. I mean, I think there are two things that will punctuate the change. Maybe that's the word I want to use. Is number one, people like you who are front and center, writing, researching, writing, and speaking to people and networking for real on the subject. And number two, just the fact that our current economic situation has shifted, right? Especially in the last couple of years, where freelancing in general is something that more and more people are willing to try and adopt as also part of their lifestyle, working lifestyle. There's a freedom to it, as you just mentioned. This wasn't always your passion, your curiosity. Your curiosities lay elsewhere before this. You studied ornithology. I had to look at the word again and make sure I pronounce it.
Ornithology, boy, nobody ever brings that up anymore.
How do you go from ornithology to Buddhism to Burma to where you are now?
I mean, I started practicing Buddhism when I was in college, and so that really preceded the ornithology. And I was doing various activities and jobs and stuff while the Buddhism was sort of there in my life. So when I've always been interested in nature and birds, because I grew up in a place in Massachusetts where we spent every summer by the ocean, and I would go bird watching, and I majored in biology in college. So, and the senior research project, they call it, I went to Bard College, they call it a senior project, where you have to do, it's sort of like a year-long thesis that you do and as a senior. And mine was on a study of the learning of bird songs by young birds. So I did this whole lab study with studying bird song and everything. So I just had an interest in birds. And then when I was living in Ithaca, New York, I got there's this beautiful bird study center there called the Laboratory of Ornithology, connected with Cornell University. And I used to go there a lot, and I became very interested in photographing birds. And that's how then I ended up working at the lab. They had a photographer there who sort of mentored me, and I learned how to sit in a blind and with a lot of patience and try to capture pictures of birds. And in those days, you use single lens reflex cameras. There was no digital, Mm-hmm. And so I worked there for many years doing bird photography, basically. And then, yes, but the Buddhism and the kind of inner work was all going on at the same time that was happening. And then eventually I ended up in California, which is where I started working on Burma and journalism. I mean, that didn't happen until later.
Why the interest in Burma? Why did you go there?
Well, what happened was I had a close friend who had been a monk in Burma, who had ordained literally into a Burmese monastery, and then spent some time in the jungles of Thailand and areas surrounding Burma.
Of course you did.
Yeah, he went to, these places where, because there was so much horrific human rights abuses going on. And so it was at the time when the Nobel Peace Laureate Aung San Suu Kyi was in prison by this vicious military junta. It was just a horrible human rights struggle for the people of Burma. And he loved that country so much. So when he came back to the States, I was just inspired by it. So we started a nonprofit together, and we started, writing articles and doing research and trying to get the word out about the struggle that people were going through in Burma. And then I actually was sort of mentored again by a journalist at a radio station. It's a long story, but anyway, in Berkeley, California. Yeah, and I was mentored by I studied journalism with this very experienced journalist, and then we did a bunch of stories together on Burma. I went over there and got a lot of interesting data when I was there and stories. And so that's how I learned journalism. And then I ended up working at that radio station, and then along came UFOs. So I've been through a lot of different paths in my life, but this is the one that's, I really landed on in 1999, haven't left.
Yeah. You said you got a report from UFOs from France. That's
exactly
how it all started. You caught the bug there. Why did you catch the bug there? What was up with that report? What happened?
Well, this report just kind of floated into my desk one day because a colleague in France mailed it to me. And it was this 90-page study of official UFO cases that have been conducted by this group of 13 people in France. And among them were like 4 generals and an admiral and a former chief of police, the former head of their space agency. I mean, really, really distinguished group of people. And they spent some years studying this and interviewing pilots and documenting cases. And they wrote this study, and it was like a white paper, and they distributed it to the government agencies in France. And they were concerned about, it was called UFOs in Defense. What are we prepared for? So they were kind of looking at the defense angle. Is this a national security problem? Do we need to train our pilots? But what was really interesting to me about it was they drew this conclusion in the report that, they looked at all the possible explanations for what UFOs might be. What are these objects? And they came to the conclusion that the most rational, logical, and reasonable explanation for the cases they studied was what they called the extraterrestrial hypothesis. So they were basically saying it's the most likely thing here is that we're being visited by something not from Earth. And I was like, what? Because they went through all the other possibilities. These were cases in which there was enough data that you could rule out conventional explanations. If you don't have enough data, you can't do that. You'll never know. But these were cases where they had a lot of really good official data, things like radar and multiple witnesses that were trained and things like that. So for them to draw a conclusion that these could be extraterrestrial, in fact, that it was likely that they were, I just thought, I was sitting there at my desk and it's like, wow, this has got to be the biggest story ever, right? I mean, you got generals saying this, admirals. These aren't just people out having a beer in their backyard, So I just thought this is a huge story, and it just really captivated me. And I started to look into it a little bit, and I found, you talk about going down a rabbit hole, going into the UFO land is a massive rabbit hole.
Sure.
But I was able to get some people to guide me. And then I ended up pitching a story to the Boston Globe on this report, which, because I'd already had a track record with the Globe, I'd published a bunch of stories with them, and I had an editor there that really liked my work. Otherwise, it never would have happened. There was so much taboo in those days. It was unbelievable how hard it was to get anything published. So
so we're talking 2000, 2020, 2001,
yeah.
right? Yes.
And it was really, really hard, even though there were all these editors that really liked me and liked my work. But yeah, it's just funny to think back on how times have changed. But this editor did this story with me, and it came out in the Sunday paper in May of 2000 based on this report. But I also did some research into cases in America and stuff like that. And he was like, that was just so much at the beginning. I mean, there were so many questions that were raised for me by that. And among them was, why is there this taboo? Why is there so much issue around this topic? There were so many things and I just was hooked. I wanted to understand what this thing was, because I knew there was incredibly solid evidence for it, and that many authorities recognized that. And so to me, it was like, if even one of these is extraterrestrial, that's huge. That's the biggest story we've ever had as human beings.
Just one. All you need is one.
All you really, if you could prove it, you'd have to be able to prove it. And that's really hard to do.
Well, you sued NASA. You want to tell us about that?
Yeah, I was a plaintiff in a lawsuit. That didn't prove anything. I tell you that. It didn't find us any proof. It just proved it. All it did was prove that the documents that we wanted were extremely sensitive, because we couldn't get our hands on them. Mm-hmm. And so that sort of suggested to us that the case that we were trying to get the documents for, which was a case of a crashed object in Pennsylvania, probably was something very, very significant, or they would have been able to just give us the documents. Oh, if we've explained it, here's the explanation. But they wouldn't do that. And we went to all the right places, we thought, in order to try to get the documents. And the judge was on our side and everything else. But it didn't come out. So it was educational. That certainly was educational.
You mentioned a word, obstructionism. So a few minutes ago, you said, I think you said giggling. I think you used the word giggling. We talked to Avi Loeb, as you know, who's an astrophysicist. He was a chair at Department of Astronomy at Harvard for almost a decade. And he's a friend of yours, and you spent some time with him very recently, and you had high praise for him, obviously. Mm-hmm. And we talked about obstructionism in his world, where academics are not allowed to research with the risk of not getting tenure.
You mean to research certain topics, right?
Correct, certain topics. Yeah. Right. So correct me, please, as we go. And he's one of the only astronomers or astrophysicists in the world who is seriously asking the questions about objects like Oumuamua, and has come to the conclusion that it may, in fact, could be technology from alien civilization that cannot be ruled out. Everything else naturally has been ruled out. And he is one of a few, if not the only one, who's actually been public about this. Mm-hmm. One of the few who's been public about this.
It's true.
So we talked about obstructionism in his world. What's obstructionism in your world? How does it manifest?
I mean, I never got real criticism or pushback. I mean, it was more, I was sort of stunned that more journalists were not jumping in. That's what really surprised me, that after that Boston Globe story came out, I kind of thought, all the leading investigative journalists of the day, maybe with the Washington Post or whatever, would like to say that, well, this topic needs to be investigated, because as a freelancer, I could only open so many doors. I couldn't open the kind of doors that a Washington Post reporter could open, or a New York Times reporter. So I thought they should take this on, but they didn't. There wasn't a peep. There wasn't any interest from anybody in the. So I was sort of more struck by the deafening silence of the response. Except for the people who care about UFOs, they were like over the moon that I'd done this, but the world at large, it was just like nothing was going on. Like, it was like UFOs didn't exist. And I couldn't understand that.
So all the while you were being invited by folks like John Podesta who was the chief of staff for Bill Clinton, also chief of the last election with Hillary Clinton, and a lobbyist and so forth. He invited you to speak to retired intelligence officers, NASA officials, Pentagon officials about this research that you were doing. This is happening all the while.
Yeah, I mean, I made a connection with him in connection with that lawsuit we talked about earlier.
Yeah,
because that was a Freedom of Information Act lawsuit, and he cares a lot about the people's right to information, and he cares about UFOs. So he kind of got behind this whole lawsuit that I was doing against NASA. So yeah, I did go to his the center that he runs in Washington and held this briefing for these very high level people, and I brought in some other people with me, and it was really a valuable meeting. So yeah, this is all going on. I mean, I just, and the whole time I was really making an effort to try to get a government official appointed, even just one person or some kind of tiny little agency to be set up to look into this, just like other countries had done. And I ended up traveling to some other countries and got connected with the agencies in those countries.
Which countries?
Well, the main ones I went to were France and Chile.
Mm-hmm.
I learned quite a bit about some of the other ones, and I knew people from England and stuff. But what was amazing about both those countries is they had these agencies that were completely public. They were fully staffed, 2 to 4 people, full-time staffers that did nothing but deal with UFOs. And it was completely public. And it was like, it made complete sense to me. And I learned how they operated. It didn't cost a lot of money to do it. And it was like, why don't we have that? Why are we just pretending these things don't exist? So one of the things John Podesta was supporting me in was in trying to get the word out that we need to have this in the United States. And that was one of the reasons, the purpose of that briefing that I did at his center was to try to interest people in government to take it seriously enough, to have somebody set up to look into this topic and to start communicating with the other countries that are doing it. I mean, if we want to get an international effort going, this is what I felt, to investigate this and really get to the bottom of it, you can't do it without the United States being involved. And all these other countries, they could do what they can do within their borders, but a powerhouse like the United States could unite the whole world, could bring the best scientists in the world to this. And so that's what I was kind of advocating for at the same time that I was doing the journalism I was doing. And John Podesta was willing to support that effort of mine. He was really important in that.
But there was then activity that we found out about thanks to you. You want to talk to us about ATIIP? Yeah, I mean, ATIIP. So yeah, the irony is, so it turned out, of course, this wasn't the kind of agency that I had envisioned, but nonetheless, it turned out that I learned in 2017 that there had been an agency at the Pentagon, and it had started in 2007 under a different name with a different focus. There was an agency set up through the DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, and then out of that sprang this agency called ATIIP, the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, which was a secret program within the Pentagon to investigate UFOs. And a man named Luis Elizondo had been in that program since 2010. He'd been there for 7 years when I found out about it in 2017. It had been completely secret. All the UFO people who kept ranting, we need a government investigation. I was asking for that too. It was going on the whole time, just in secret. And of course, it was only dealing with military cases. And I think most people were hoping for something that was broader than that. But we sort of are getting there now. But in any case, in 2017, what started everything going that's now precipitated in a huge change is that Luis Elizondo became so frustrated with the lack of resources and the lack of support he was getting for his work at ATIIP at the Pentagon that he resigned, because he thought he could do more good if he went outside of the agency than he could do inside. He just wasn't getting what he needed to do the work. And so he wrote a letter, a very powerful memo letter to the Secretary of Defense, who he was personally friends with, explaining why he was leaving, and he left. And the day, I think it was the day after he actually resigned, I was called to a meeting with him by some mutual colleagues for both of ours. And I got to sit across the table with this man for 3 hours who had been heading up this program. It was like the most amazing moment of my career. Must have been surreal.
It was surreal. I just could not believe it. And I was shown the videos that eventually came out. I was shown lots of documentation about the program. I was, his performance evaluations, a letter from Harry Reid, the senator who started the program, all kinds of stuff. And I ended up going to the New York Times with their permission, of course, because I had a colleague who was a freelance, was on the staff at the Times. He'd been on the staff for years and years and was now freelancing for the Times. His name's Ralph Blumenthal. And so he and I took the story to the New York Times, and it ended up, we joined with a third journalist who was assigned to us by the Times, an outstanding Pentagon correspondent for the Times named Helene Cooper. The three of us did this story that came out in December of 2017, and that really rocked the world. The story basically revealed the fact that there was this program, talked about how it got funded, how it got started, what it did, and it released 2 videos of Navy videos along with that. And people went nuts over the videos. It's the first time there have been any official videos released. I mean, ever, I think, but certainly not since the close of Project Blue Book in 1970. So it was, one of them was the Tic Tac video. And we wrote about that, also that case, the Nimitz case that has since become so famous. We wrote about in that story as well. And so there was the Tic Tac video, and then the other one was the gimbal video that shows the object kind of going up along the cloud bank. So that's, that changed everything. And it changed my work, and it also changed the whole climate in Washington. And it was like a domino effect. All kinds of things started to happen. And now here we are. We just had last week, we had congressional hearings on UFOs for the first time since 1968. So, it's been amazing. Yeah.
Who would have thought that a aspiring ornithologist from Massachusetts might change the world?
Well, I helped. I didn't change it, but I did it with a bunch of other people. But yeah, I mean, even when I first started reporting on UFOs, I never would have ever imagined this happening, to be able to write a front page story for the New York Times, never in a million years,
huge. That's huge.
Huge is exactly right. Exactly right.
So there are 2 things that have gotten me curious since I've spoken to you. One of them is, I want to know the kind of person that you got to know at the Boston Globe in 2000 or 2001, and your publishers at Random House, who went in and agreed to help publish your paper in your book. Like, because I was leading edge, pioneering, first mover.
I know it was, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's hard to believe now, because now everybody wants to write about UFOs.
Right.
Every journalist, there's competition now for it, But the journalist, I mean, what was her? Gosh, I didn't know you asked me this. I'm blanking on what her name was. It was so long ago. I think her name is in that New Yorker story, maybe. But what was interesting about her at the time was she was so nervous about running this story. She agreed to it, but it's just hard for me to even imagine it right now, because she was so nervous about it. And it was
still did it. She still did it.
She still did it. But, at one point she even said to me, forget it, I'm not doing it. She canned it. She said no. And I was devastated. And then I went back and said, look, how about we just change this, that, and this? Will you do it then? And then she took it up again, I mean, and she really edited, she really controlled that article. And there was nothing in it that was at all sensationalistic or weird. It was just about what these military people were saying in France, and then it was about military people in America. And it wasn't claiming that these were aliens. It wasn't even saying they were extraterrestrial. It was more, we don't know, but they proposed this theory. It was very conservative. And so I thought she had great guts to do it, because she was so nervous about it that she backed off at one point. And the thing about it was, she controlled, I remember, it was a Sunday news analysis section that it was in the Globe, and it was called the Forum section. And she was the top editor for that section. She didn't have anybody above her that she had to go to for approval to get whatever she wanted to get in the Sunday paper. So fortunately, she was in charge. And if that hadn't been the case, it might never have happened. Because there were other situations where an editor would want to take one of my stories about UFOs. He'd say, okay. And then he'd come back to me in 2 days and say, sorry, I went up the chain of command and somebody nixed it up there,
Yeah, yeah.
But this woman didn't have that problem. So, I really admired her. I remember feeling so grateful, and I thought she had incredible courage to do it. And she didn't receive any flack for it, as I recall, she didn't. But it was just there was so much stigma then. It's changed so radically since then, but it was just, this subject was considered an absolute joke, sci-fi, nothing to it. And you really took a risk in the media if you talked about it. So it was just amazing when you think about it now, how different it is.
It's only 20 years. I mean, 20 years is a long time in a human's life cycle, but it's only 20 years to change beliefs.
It's just been radically changed now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's been so wonderful to watch all that happen and to be part of it. Yeah.
Well, okay, so I'm just going to throw something in here. You can comment on it or not. It just reminded me as I was prepping for this recording, for this discussion. Recording sounds cold. It's not a recording. It's a discussion.
Discussion, conversation.
Yeah, that's all it is. We had a previous guest on about a year ago or so. Episode is in the 40s, 43 or 44. His name is Troy Johnson. He's a radio producer. Music producer. His nickname is Radio. That's why I say out of LA. And he's a buff. He's a UFO buff. He's been reading all his life. He's been reading up on it and wanting to know more. He's just a curious guy. And he said at one point his friend and roommate's uncle, I believe, entered the room once and they were talking. And this uncle worked at Area 51 and just said, if I were allowed to tell you what I've seen and what I know, it would change your life forever.
Wow. That's powerful.
Isn't it?
There are a lot of stories like that I've heard, and you never can prove them. You never can write about them. You can't do anything with them, but it's every time I hear something like that, I get chills. It's really, really powerful.
Me too. And a guy like Luis Elizondo, who you spend time with, I'm sure has seen, who knows, if communicated, whatever, he has seen stuff that's changed his life. I'm sure of it.
Absolutely. He has said as much.
Right.
And, he has very high clearances. So he's seen the classified database there that we're not allowed to see. Yeah, it does change your life. Even when you don't see the classified, you can get your life changed just by what's out there.
This is what's frustrating for me in general, because and this includes me. We all live a life that's hurried and busy. We have to make money to feed our families. All that, if it sounds silly, all that gets in the way of spending the time to think about and ask these questions, these existential questions. Are we alone? It's like
yeah. I mean, it's a luxury to have the time to do it for a lot of people. It's absolutely true.
And a privilege. Yeah,
and I feel very privileged to be able to do that.
That's what's unfortunate, because this shouldn't be a privilege. It shouldn't.
Yeah. I mean, I guess you can think, even if you have to struggle whether you're making a living and raising your kids, you can still be thinking about it in your brain. But I mean, I think a lot of people just aren't interested. They just, they have too much on their plate. It's like a luxury. They have too much on their plate. And I completely understand that. But you're saying it shouldn't have to be that way. I don't know how it could be. Yeah. I mean, if people didn't have to struggle so much just to make a living, then it wouldn't have to be that way.
It's the systems that we've put in place that drive our beliefs and maybe have us not face our fears. But who knows?
I don't know.
Just again, as another side note, again, writing these notes here before our discussion, it reminded me of Sunday night TV watching with my mom. So I have 3 siblings, and the 5 of us would watch X-Files. So we're talking early 90s. And we weren't buffs. It was a great show, and it provided,
I loved it. Yeah.
So imaginative. But I remember during commercial breaks, we were we were just so spooked. We'd have to leave the darkened family room, go into the kitchen, turn on all the lights, breathe, look at each other, and make sure we were still there. We're still human beings. There's nobody else around us. But I remember there's like 2 or 3 years of those memories. But maybe that kind of memory, so the memory of consuming entertainment and shows meant for us to be gripped, have distorted our view of why we should ask these questions to begin with. Like I find these questions are more rooted in fear with people than in just simple, plain vanilla curiosity.
Yeah. So what you're saying is you think that the entertainment world maybe stokes the fears, because most of the entertainment movies and stuff and TV shows are about scary scenarios, basically. So many movies about aliens attacking us and that kind of thing. So yeah, I think there is a certain amount of fear. And there's also a fear of the unknown. I think a lot of people just don't like to contemplate something that's not only unknown, but more powerful than they are, right? The UFOs are completely out of our control. They're way more advanced than we are. So it can be kind of scary just in that sense, that it's something we don't understand and we have no control over. And that can be frightening, but so I don't know. I think people have all kinds of different ways of relating to it and understanding what it's about. But I do think there are a lot of people that just don't care. They're just not interested in it, and that's fine too. That's their choice.
So let's go to the second question, because you do care. And the second question about, do we survive death? Let's talk.
Okay.
So why did you? So I told you that I purchased your book, and I'm still reading it. No, it's a fascinating read.
Thank you.
But some of the cases I already know about, but your book outlays them with much more detail than I even knew existed. Including a story about I always forget his name, the child who remembers a past life as an Air Force pilot or a Navy pilot.
Right, James Leininger. Yeah, Leininger. Yeah. And
he cried like a mournful cry when they finally brought him to. Hey, we won't have to go through the whole story.
Oh, you're talking about when they took him back to his house. That's Cameron from Scotland. I forget his last name.
No,
you're talking about the.
When they brought him to Japan.
Oh, when they brought him to Japan. Yeah, that was, it was like sobbing. It was like intense, cathartic. Yeah. That's an amazing story. Yeah. And there's a video of it too.
Oh, I didn't know that. Is it searchable on YouTube?
If you watch the series Surviving Death on Netflix, in the last episode, it's about reincarnation. And we cover that case. And we go back and visit James as a 21-year-old, which is really interesting. And he, I think they got some clips from that because it was like they just took a family video of the whole thing on the ship, not knowing that was going to happen to him. They just wanted to film the ritual they were doing, and he, so that was a pretty powerful thing, definitely. Episode 1's on near-death experiences. I think they did a really good job with that. And then episode 6 is on reincarnation cases. And it includes both the ones in my book, the one Ryan Hammond's and James Leininger. And then there's another case, which is a contemporary case that they include as well. So I think that they did a great job with that final episode.
I've forgotten already here. It's Breakthrough Films.
Yeah. If you just it's on Netflix. It's called Surviving Death. Breakthrough Films is this independent film company that I've worked with. Right now I'm doing a series with them. This is our third project together, the one I'm doing right now. So I've worked with them for years, and they're great people and great filmmakers.
So on the podcast, we've had Bruce Grayson, as you know, we've had Bruce Grayson.
Yeah.
We've had Antonia Mills, who has researched reincarnation cases.
Yeah.
Russell Targ and such. So we like to explore this with people. Why did you decide to explore this? Because you went all in, just like you did on the UFO initiative. Why all in on here? Why?
Well, I don't know really why I'm drawn to it. I had an interest in the reincarnation cases for a long time. Even while I was doing UFOs, you mentioned that story of James Leininger. I was fascinated by these cases of young children who would remember so many details of a past life that you could actually verify that it was accurate. Mm-hmm. And you could find out who that specific person was. And these were like 2 and 3-year-olds who there's no way they could have gotten this information somewhere in the culture, And then to be able to verify it, to me as a journalist, it was like so solid. So I was fascinated by that because I'm always looking for, I like proof, I like physical manifestations of things, evidence for things that are mysterious. I've always just wanted to have, solid evidence for things that are mysterious because I want to know if they're real or not. I just got that kind of mind. I want to know, is this real or not? Do we reincarnate? And so when something comes along that's really evidential of that, that's very hard to explain any other way, it's like, wow, that really means a lot to me. So I was just very, fascinated by those cases. And then after my UFO book came out, my publisher, a couple of years later, it was just time for me to do something else or do another book. And I really wanted to do a book on this topic, which was not just on the reincarnation cases, but on all kinds of evidence suggesting that we survive death. I wanted to bring it all together in one book. And there was a synchronicity where I had kind of had this idea to do that. I had written myself a very rough outline or proposal kind of thing. I called up my agent. And I was going to pitch it to my agent to take it back to my publisher. And she called me right the same week that I was going to call her and said, I just got a call from Crown, your publisher, and they want to know if you want to do another book. So it was like the timing was incredible. And we pitched this idea to them and they went for it immediately. And yeah, it was just like, but what was interesting about it for me, Luciano, was that it was a journey. It was an exploration, this book, whereas the UFO book was I had done all this research for 10 years and I kind of put it into a book. With Surviving Death, I didn't know what was going to be in the book. I didn't know where it was going to take me. I mean, I knew roughly what was going to be in the book, but it was much more of an exploratory journey that happened while I was writing it. And I was learning as I was writing it rather than, so it was very, very different. It was much more personal than the UFO book.
So two things then. Let me interrupt you there, Leslie, because the one thing is in the introduction, let me read out a little passage here that you wrote, because it shows to the authenticity of your approach to this material, I think, because there are very few that write this way in the preface of any of this type of work that I've ever read. I don't know, other than maybe Bruce Grayson, because he's very similar to you in this way. I think it's my personal.
Yeah.
So you state, I fully respect all perspectives and hope that evidence suggestive of survival might enrich and support anyone's search for more objective answers, regardless of their background. My intention is to provide clarity and not to create conflict. I hope you will agree that it would be interesting to look at what actually is when dealing with such an important question. And then you talk about the journey and how this is your own personal journey and how you had deaths in your family, the people close to you, while you were assembling this book and the material. And one of them was your brother.
Right.
And you mentioned that you went to visit a medium. And there were, in the book, there were two mediums because you wanted to verify whether one was actually researching about you or your brother first. And so you went anonymously to another one in Ireland.
Yep.
So what happened?
Well, it's a long story, but first I went to one medium. So I had lost my brother and a close friend named Bud Hopkins, and my friend Bud died in 2011. So it was before I even started the book. And then I lost my brother while I was writing the book, very suddenly and tragically, no idea what was going to happen. And so I did this one reading with a medium named Laura Lynn Jackson that was absolutely life-changing because of the specificity of the information that she brought through. And the personalities of both of them were present and all these details that she couldn't possibly have known. So I was so blown away by that. I found out who another really good medium was. And 2 months later, I did a second reading, and I was very careful with this one that she didn't know my name. She didn't know where I lived. I made a special email address, that didn't reflect my name. I think I might have given her my first name spelled differently than my name. That was it. I could have been anywhere. She's in Ireland. She does it on Skype. She had no way of figuring out who I was. And I did this meditation where I asked the two people who had come through before, my brother and my friend Bud, to say something, to repeat something that they had said in the first reading and the second one. and I asked him to repeat something exactly the same. And I said, then I'll know it's really you. I asked them, and I thought, this is crazy. It'll never happen, but why not? Like, what do I got to lose, right? I don't have to ever tell anybody I even made this request. I just made that request. And it actually happened. I mean, the second reading, we were doing this thing on Skype, and she was also unbelievably specific. I mean, it was just mind blowing to me because readings usually aren't as good as these two were. These were unusually good. I mean, like 90% accuracy or something like that. And in the second reading, both my brother and Bud said something exactly as they had said it before. And it was not just a fact like, oh, I died at a certain time. It was a personal message that they had given in the first reading that was very personal to me, that nobody could possibly understand what it meant. Even if you heard the words, you wouldn't understand what they meant. And so the thing that got repeated was the thing that had the most personal meaning to me. It was just phenomenal to me. And there was no way that that medium, a second medium, didn't know the first medium. They didn't know each other existed. I checked with both of them. There's no way she could have looked me up or found out who I was. So it was pretty amazing to me, that situation. Yeah, they were incredible meeting. Unfortunately, the second one is now deceased. Her name was Sandra O'Hara. She's one of the greatest mediums around, but she died she was also in Surviving Death.
Huh.
Yeah, if you
Which
might have
episode?
seen her in the second episode, she was in my living room in New York.
Oh, yeah.
Reading.
Yeah.
Very large woman. And,
Yeah.
You didn't see her at her best. Because when somebody's got cameras on them, they're not at their best.
It's a different story.
Definitely. But when she does a private reading with somebody, oh man, she was just so good. So yeah, it was really life-changing for me. I just couldn't believe. And also the personalities were clearly there. The subtleties of the way they talked, of their energy, the types of personalities that came through were also exactly right for those two people.
So what are your beliefs, Leslie? Where do you exist after your body dies? How do you exist after your body dies?
I think it's probably, I can't say I'm 100. I always have a kernel of doubt about everything because I just drive myself crazy with that. But I'm pretty convinced that something does survive. I would say I do believe that there's some aspect of consciousness, some essence of who we are that does survive our bodies. I do believe that. I can't prove it. And I can't say I'm 100% certain of it because I can't prove it. But when you put together all the different evidence from different areas and also my own personal experience, because there's nothing like personal experience to really convince you of something. It's not something you can ever convince somebody else about, but you have a certain knowing when you have your own experiences that are really meaningful and powerful. So I think it's just, so that's pretty much, I would say, I think it's pretty hard for me to imagine that there's nothing left after the body dies. But I could be wrong. And maybe we're all fantasizing all this stuff because we don't want to face death. But I don't know how we can make a lot of the stuff happen that happens. I just don't think it's pretty, it'd be very hard to explain how all these things can happen if something else wasn't going on. So, so I that's my sense of it, that we just, something survives death. And I don't know what that afterworld is like or how long we're around or what happens.
Maybe this is a naive question. Where do you think your curiosities will bring you after this kind of work?
Well, I think these two issues are lifelong issues. I don't think there'll be anything else for me because they're always, the more you learn, the more questions you have. There's always questions. I'm not tired of either one of these things. So I can't imagine that, there's a lot more. I've done so much more with UFOs than I have with the other work. And so I think that what would naturally happen for me was if UFOs somehow became resolved or I became less interested in that, I would just shift more to the surviving death world because there's so much more work I could do on some of that material. And there's a lot more studies I've got shelves of books that I want to read on it that I haven't read, things like that. I think I would go more into that, into the more spiritual kind of survival consciousness universe. of human super abilities, superpowers that human beings have, and things that relate to consciousness. And that's going to take me for the rest of my life. I don't, that's a never-ending journey, the way I see it.
What's last question? What's greatness to you?
What's greatness? Greatness. It's something that inspires me. I mean, if I'm talking about a person that I would consider great, I think would be someone with a lot of integrity, who has, inspires me in some way, who teaches me something, who brings something positive to the world, makes a contribution. I don't know. I think I'm saying all things that are very obvious.
Well, you're also a judge. We had last comment here, I think. I hope. Yeah. Maybe not. Sharon Rowlett. We had her on, and she was a finalist, she was a finalist in essay writing competition last year.
Yeah, for the Bigelow Institute of Consciousness Studies. Yeah.
Right. And there were two judges. There's
six judges.
Six judges, but you were one of the six judges.
Exactly. Yeah.
So you got to read research from many scholars around the world.
Right. 205, I believe, 206 papers in a period of a few months. Yeah.
That's a lot of learning. That's a lot of learning.
You're not kidding. It was way too much. Yeah.
Well, I mentioned that only because I have found you. We've only spent a little bit of time together here, but I found you to be extremely modest. But I think I agree with the New Yorker when they say that you're self-possessed, because you need to be in order to ask these questions and then pursue the answers. So I'm going to thank you for being a model and searching for answers.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I mean, it's just feels so natural to me. It's like I can't imagine not doing it. But I'm also, again, I do recognize how fortunate I am to be able to do it. I mean, that I don't have a lot of financial burdens on me. I have the time and the space to do it. And I can't imagine living without that. That's what gives my life meaning. So that, and the people in my life, so, and I've been doing it for so long that it's just it's like the core of my life. It's very natural. And I hope that I can help, bring some of that to people. I mean, I know that so many people have benefited from surviving death because they've lost loved ones or they've been terrified of dying. And I've gotten so many letters from people and, Facebook and emails and stuff about how that book has just, and also it's just changed their lives, because in so many ways, a lot of it is too, it gives people permission to talk about their own experiences, there's a lot of taboo in that world too. It's probably worse than UFOs right now, that UFOs have sort of become okay now. But this other type of research into psychic phenomena and after death stuff and, mediumship and all this weird stuff is really taboo. And I think one of the things I like to be able to do with my work is to shine a light on the kind of irrationality of the skeptical mindset, and to really give people permission to feel safe to talk about it, to feel like your experiences are valid, legitimate. Other people are having the same things happen to them, and you can talk about them, and there's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing weird about it. And I think so many people, also from the series on Netflix, that was what they took away from it. That, okay, my experiences are not weird. I can talk about them now. And then they'll write me an email and say, I'll never talked to anybody about this before, but you're the first person. And they just feel finally they can get it off their chest. I feel like if I can give that to even one person, it means a whole lot, to just be able to give that gift to people. And it also expands consciousness for me. And I think the other people that come up against this, it just expands your perceptions of who you are and what the universe is all about. And I think curiosity is a really something that I'm inflicted by, It's a wonderful thing to feel curious, and also to feel a sense of awe about our world and about the meaning of everything, and that what lies beyond our physical world. I mean, if I can impart some of that to other people, because I just naturally feel it myself, then I feel very satisfied to be able to, I feel that's something I can give to people. And I'm so grateful to be able to do it, because it makes me feel connected and makes me happy that I can make a contribution. So yeah. I forget what we were talking about, but that's what it's just the way that I connect with the world. I was just saying it's very natural to me. Yeah.
Well, let's bookend it there, because speaking of gratitude, I'm grateful to have had the opportunity to ask you that one last question.
Thank you very much. It's a good question.
Well, so curiosity is a big thing on this podcast. And one of our previous speakers used to be an ex-KGB agent. And he became an ex-KGB agent because he's self-admittedly an egomaniac, but also very curious and adventurous. And in exploring his curiosities, he was able to change his beliefs.
That's great. Yeah, I think that'll happen. Because you'll discover things if you explore your curiosity. You'll discover things that change everything for you.
Amen, sister. Leslie, thank you so much.
So good to be on with you, Luciano. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Hey, it's Enrico Colantoni here, actor, director, and dedicated napper. Like what you heard today, there's more to come. Make sure to subscribe to Behind Greatness and learn about our live events at inspirenorth.com. You'll also find links to our social media right on our website, so be sure to give us a like and follow. Until next time, stay inspired.